Coming up on Chopper's political podcast, whether or not people in the UK want to embrace this, they really should use Nigel as much as they possibly can.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best insight and stories from our studio at GB News here in Westminster. Finally, the moment is upon us. On Monday, Donald Trump replaces Joe Biden as the US president the second time round, and the fun will really start then in global politics. Already his influence is being felt, with a peace deal agreed late this week in the Gaza war. After he said on Tuesday, just last week, if those hostages are not brought back by the inauguration, all hell will break out. Is this the beginning then of a deal-making presidency from Donald Trump? The president-elect said tonight that his election had signalled to the entire world that his administration would seek peace and negotiate deals, plural, to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. So what are the deals does Donald Trump have in mind? Is Gaza the first deal? What's next? Ukraine, Russia? Even, whisper it quietly here in London, vetoing Sir Keir Starmer's Chagos deal. I'll be talking to Gerry Gunster, an American political strategist who has met Donald Trump several times and can help us navigate what a Trump presidency, Trump 2, if you like, will mean for the world and, of course, particularly here in the UK. But first, the rape gang scandal. Last week I spoke to Tory MP Robbie Moore. He said why it was so important in his view to have a national public inquiry. That came after Sir Keir Starmer told me at a press conference that it was the idea of this was jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Fast forward just over a week, and Yvette Cooper has just announced in the House of Commons that Dame Louise Casey, Baroness Casey now, will conduct a 3-month rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country. That's Yvette Cooper's words. Is that the government tiptoeing towards ordering a national public inquiry? Some think Starmer's right to oppose, as things stand, a national inquiry. He said so, didn't he, in Prime Minister's questions. He says then it'll be led by victims. Others don't agree. Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage and other senior party leaders. To test that approach, I'm joined now by David Greenwood, a solicitor at Swedalski's, a law firm across the north of England, who is personally currently representing dozens of victims of rape gangs in Rotherham and Bradford. David Greenwood, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, good to see you.
David, how long have you been working with victims of these child grooming cases?
So I was first introduced to the Rotherham case in 2012. And yeah, I've been working on it ever since, and on many other of these types of grooming cases also. And of course, for all sorts of victims of child abuse in other settings too. Yeah.
It's deeply upsetting work, I'm sure, very difficult possibly to talk about, but if I can try and do that with you. I mean, how many victims of child grooming gangs have you come across, or are you representing at the moment?
So I work on exploitation. I work in a small team of 4 of us, and we're probably working at any one time on about 50 or 60 cases. Cases come along and we work on them and they finish. So at any one time, it's about 50 or 60, I would say. Yeah.
And how many have you met over the years? How many victims have you met over the years or come across, worked with?
I've worked closely with probably, around that figure, 60, 70, 80 women. Yeah.
And they're young children when you meet them, first of all? They're children?
No, they tend to be women in their 20s when I first meet them. That's the time at which they, the light bulb moment goes on that, these men weren't their boyfriends and that they were exploited by them.
And you represent them in a court case, is that right? Or you go to the police with them? Is that how you do it?
All right. So, if they haven't already been to the police, I advise them to go to the police straight away and report it. That's the first step. And when the police investigation is finished, then I can sort of start doing my investigations and you know finding out as much as I can about what happened and what the local authority and the police knew about what was going on, or should have known what was going on. You see, I have to be careful not to tread on the toes of a police investigation, because you know what tends to happen with defences of these individuals is that their barristers will say, "Well, you're only doing this for the money, aren't you? You've only done this for a compensation claim, and you're making all this up." So I try and step back so that the client can say, "Look, she's only really dealt with the police, and hasn't really begun a compensation case."
And the victims, when they're talking about, they're basically adults now, but talking about a time maybe 8 or 10 years before when they were teenagers, or very young teenagers. Is that the case?
That's the case, definitely. Yeah, that's the case. They're talking about times when they were 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 16 years old. Yeah.
You must have heard some really difficult testimonies from these women, David.
Yeah. Listen, Chris, don't get me wrong. This is awful stuff, but it doesn't just happen in the exploitation sphere. It happens, in families at home mainly, and in contexts where people just take advantage of children and vulnerable children.
The story,
Churches, scouts, yeah, all sorts of different places. Yeah,
it's all about vulnerable children, isn't it?
it is. Yeah.
You said compensation there. So where do these victims get compensation from? Is that after a criminal case is concluded?
Yes, that's right. When the criminal case is concluded, we tend to pursue the case either against the local authority if the child was in care and they were aware or should have been aware that they were being exploited, or there are human rights cases that can be taken against the police and the local authority. Just slightly different type of case, but it achieves the same end, which is to give the girl something to hopefully pay for some therapy and give her a start in life. Because
and that's it. It's a failure of duty of care. That's why there's compensation to be paid out.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And what's a typical settlement that might be made by a council or police force or public authority?
Well, the short answer, Chris, is not enough. But
is it tens of thousands of pounds or hundreds of thousands of pounds or?
No, it's tens of thousands of pounds. In the low tens of thousands of pounds. Most awards are under £50,000.
Despite the trauma they're going through and they're experiencing in their early 20s.
That's right, yeah. When we first started all these cases, we were achieving good settlements of, 80, 90, £100,000 regularly. But the law has, our opponents really doubled down on opposing the cases and exploited the law and got the law sort of slightly changed in their favour, which made it harder for us to pursue these cases. So it's what we tend to do is to rather than taking a chance, going for broke, rather than taking a chance at court and losing altogether, because we could do, we tend to settle these cases, and settlements build in the possibility of losing altogether. So because the laws changed a bit in the last 6 or 7 years, adversely for us, settlements are lower and tend to be between £20,000 and £50,000 on average.
Why have they changed? It seems extraordinary that the government would try and change the law to make councils and forces, other authorities, pay out less to these victims of their failures.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not the government. It's common law.
Common law has changed. There's been rulings in the courts. Right, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's all around the damages that are due for a breach of statutory duties by local authorities, and whether they owe statutory duties to kids that are not in care. And the law says that they generally don't.
And you've got barristers employed by the councils and police to pick apart these victims' stories about how they were abused as young children.
Yes, exactly.
And that's hard to understand. They feel hurt already, damaged already, and now the authority that allowed it to happen is questioning their stories.
Yes, questioning their stories, questioning whether all this was down to the exploitation, or whether it was down to their parents or other factors in their lives. Yes, our opponents try to exploit every avenue they can to depress the potential value of the case.
And that goes back to the heart of the problem, which is these young girls were blamed for being attacked or abused, and weren't they? We saw it, didn't we? How they're young, drunk 12-year-olds, they are consenting. That is at the heart of this dreadful scandal, isn't it? And it looks like it's being carried on in the civil courts.
Yeah, it's the worst kind of victim blaming possible. These girls were told to come back when they're not drunk, or were called child prostitutes, or the parents were blamed, and just weren't taken seriously. And police just seem to, in a lot of instances, most instances in my experience, didn't seem to care.
How could the system, this on the civil courts system, which you'll take these victims through, how can that be changed to make it better for them and fairer to them?
Okay, this civil court system suffers in this particular field from the case that we've talked about, which has allowed local authorities to say these children weren't in care, so they're not our responsibility. If we breach our duties to them, then we're not responsible. The government could reverse that common law by statute. I'd like to see that.
Can I ask you a difficult question, which is part of the problem of the story? The people perpetrating the abuse, are they mainly Pakistani men?
In my experience, they are. But there again, I haven't really delved down into their origin. They seem to have Muslim names, but there are a lot of Eastern European people and other ethnic groups, but other nationalities who are perpetrating this type of thing, along with a number of what you would describe as white European people.
What do the victims want? I mean, and the victims you're just talking about, they are living in which towns in the country? Was it Rotherham, something, Bradford, Keighley, is that right? Where are they?
Yeah, at the moment, our clients tend to be from Rotherham, West Yorkshire, that's the Huddersfield, Batley, Dewsbury, Heckmondwike areas, Bradford, and increasingly Greater Manchester, Oldham, Rochdale, Bolton.
And what do they want? So the politics in the past 10 days has been politicians calling for a national public inquiry. The view is that the Baroness J report in 2022 but looked at 6 sample towns across the country, didn't really dig down into the problem and address it in detail. There has been, of course, reports by Jay back in 2014 in Rotherham, and then others too. But and one being, I think one's ordered now in Oldham. Would a national inquiry help your clients, David?
So we have to split this into 2 parts, I think. If we are to concentrate on future safeguarding, the future prevention of this, a national inquiry to explain the extent of it and who's committing it, what went wrong, is not going to help. That's already been done. Professor Jay did that as part of a big inquiry when she examined police and local authority responses in 6 towns and cities around the country. Some excellent recommendations came out of that, which is still to be implemented. So that's for the future. That's already been done. We just need that to be implemented. Now, the second part of it is, the country or the media seem to be curious, or some commentators seem to be curious as to the extent of the abuse and what went wrong, and want to be educated or enlightened on that. This is the past. If a government wants to spend some money on an inquiry to look at the past, then fine. The learning's already been done from Alexis Jay. We know, those of us who have been paying attention over the last 10 years know what's happened, know what's gone on, know how it happens. If you were to ask me whether I think we ought to have one of these big inquiries, I would say it would be a waste of money. But that's a political decision, I suppose.
But what you would like in looking forward, dealing with the aftermath of what happened over decades, is perhaps that changes to the civil law and enable payouts more quickly, and the stories are not so contested, which I imagine can make it matters worse for them.
Exactly, that's what I would like to see. As part of, incidentally, as part of the 20 recommendations that Alexis Jay made, she suggested, or her panel, that inquiry suggested, the setting up of a national redress scheme, which would compensate victims of a violent crime, child sexual abuse in particular. The thing is, our current system is adversarial. We are, it's them and us fighting it out in court, and there's only one winner. And that's a tough system for a girl of, who is in her 20s trying to start her life off to go through. She has to be, have her story examined, has to explain it multiple times to the police, to lawyers, to psychologists, and then to have it picked apart, only to end up with, not substantial damages. It's not a good system, and it probably puts a lot of victims off. There are probably thousands of women out there who think it's just not worth it, so don't bother, and they suffer in silence.
So the money for a public inquiry might be better spent, as you say, on a redress system, trying to find a way to help these women find the money to spend on psychological support in their 20s and getting past what happened to them.
I have a different take on it. I think the money that could be used for an inquiry should be used to implement those recommendations from the Alexis Jay inquiry. The redress system could, if it follows the Australian model, be almost self-funding. Okay. It wouldn't cost much because it would follow the polluter pays doctrine. Yeah. So organisations, institutions would have to sign up to the scheme, and if they didn't, they would perhaps lose their charitable status or any tax breaks, etc., and be named and shamed. And if under the scheme a person was compensated, that institution would would settle the bill at the end of the day.
And David, just very finally, just how widespread is this scandal? I mean, some people say there's hundreds of thousands of girls have been affected in it. Is that over the top? I mean, just going on what you know and what you've seen in your daily work. How wide is a scandal which we're only the tip of the iceberg on, or is it broadly known and acknowledged now? Or
based on my knowledge of the cases that I see and all the reports that I've read, it's very substantial. It's in every town and every city. The kids on the street are being exploited for sex, and there's obviously the criminal exploitation as well, being forced to do criminal acts also. So yeah, it's really big, and I suppose the question could be asked: how far back do we want to go? Because this was happening, further back than just the 90s. Yeah.
So it could be hundreds of thousands of girls, now adults, affected by this.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Well, David Greenwood, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Chris.
Now, we are, of course, days from the start of Donald Trump's second term as President of the United States. But what will it mean for the UK? And who will be the person with a hotline to the Oval Office? So Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage? With me now to lift the veil on the next 4 years of a Trump White House is Gerry Gunster, a Washington-based public affairs expert who has met Donald Trump several times. Gerry Gunster, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. A very exciting weekend for you in Washington, starting with a party in a hotel tomorrow night. Nigel Farage goes, he's the guest of honour. It should be quite an event.
Yeah, we're going to do it at the historic Hay Adams Hotel. It's hard to believe that it was 9 years, right? I guess we're coming up on Brexit on 10-year anniversary. Yeah. 9 years when we hosted that event very shortly after Brexit happened and after the first term of President Trump. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, it was January 2017, and I was lucky enough to be there. How many times have you met Trump himself? You, of course, photographed, weren't you, outside the elevator in Trump Tower with Donald Trump and Aaron Banks, I think, and others. And I know Nigel Farage, obviously.
Yeah, well, not as much as Nigel, but I think 3 times I've met the president or been around him and his staff, and lots of times inside the White House when he was around in 2016.
It already feels like a more focused administration. Last time there's a long time to fill all those different jobs, as you remember, because of they wasn't really embraced by the hierarchy in the Republican Party. This time it feels like a more focused, almost a deal-making president, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a far more professional group of people that he's put around. I don't think that they are as surprised, I suppose, as they were in 2016. And they really had their ducks in a row well before he was elected. They made sure that the proper transition was in place months in advance before he got in there. And you're right, Chris. A lot of the established Republicans, if you will, are no longer around. I mean, you have to remember when he was voted for impeachment, there was a handful of Republicans that voted in favor of the impeachment. Those people aren't around anymore.
And he's going through now. The key nominees are being checked out. Pete Hegseth at Defense, Kristi Noem at Homeland Security, Marco Rubio, who we'll see a lot of. He'll be your chief diplomat, the Secretary of State. They're all being approved, are they? I mean, they're not all that experienced, are they, with the ways of Washington?
No, but I'm surprised, to be honest with you, because when they first announced these picks, there was a lot of chatter about how difficult it was going to get these nominees through the process. And so far, actually, it's been relatively smooth. I mean, there was certainly plenty of drama with Hegseth and yesterday with some of the nominations, but that's all just politics. By all accounts, all of these nominees are going to get voted in.
They'll sail through, will they? Is that because we should view this Trump administration as really a 2-year term? I say that because in years 3 and 4, he's going to be a lame duck, isn't he? And everyone will be planning for the future, unless he changes the constitution and allows to stand for a third term, which as things stand, he can't do. But is that why? Or we're going to have a quite a chaotic, a bumpy, revolutionary almost 2-year term? We've got Elon Musk with his DOGE department. He's coming back in 18 months' time. Is that the focus?
Yeah, I think things are going to move very quickly, very swiftly because of what you just said, the 2-year window that he has. I'm a political scientist. I would actually have to go back and look, but it's only happened 1 or 2 times in the history of this country where a sitting president in his first term has actually held on to seats in Congress. And you're talking about a handful of seats that could easily flip. And they know that. They know that history's against them after the 2 years. So, yeah, this is going to be very quick, very fast, and you're going to see this administration move very, very quickly on a number of items.
We've seen that already, aren't we? We're counting down. We're 4 or 5 days out from, or 3 days out from Monday when he's sworn as president. But we're seeing the deals being done. Notably, I mean, would you give him the credit for driving the peace in Gaza? I know Joe Biden claimed it overnight in a statement from the Oval Office. Who would you say it was down to?
Yeah, I didn't hear the entire speech last night. I caught a little bit of it, the Biden's farewell speech last night. He took credit for getting this deal done. You know, as I was driving in this morning, it sounds like some of it's still left to be negotiated, but hopefully it'll work out. But even the sort of mainstream media is acknowledging that Trump had a lot to do with getting this through.
I mean,
so
he did
yes,
say,
it's already
he?
happening.
And he said that's the press conference in Mar-a-Lago last week. They talked there'd be all hell would break out if these hostages are not released by inauguration day. I mean, he says this stuff. He's moving the market, isn't he, in global diplomacy? I mean, you got to say that. It looks pretty obvious that
he really is. You know, Chris, I guess you and I have been around long enough to remember when we were probably young bucks, but Jimmy Carter coming into office during the Iranian hostage crisis, and they waited until 12:01 when Carter had left office to release those hostages in Iran. It certainly feels a lot like that. Maybe not to that extent, but there's certainly Trump has had a lot to do with this, I would think.
I was particularly struck, I think, when he said that his election signaled, this is Trump, to the entire world, that his administration would seek peace and negotiate deals, plural, to ensure the safety of all Americans and allies. Now, deals, plural, he's a deal maker, the art of the deal, and so on. If Gaza's the first deal, is the second deal Russia-Ukraine, peace, maybe, some deal there, and maybe a third deal is vetoing Sir Keir Starmer's deal in the UK here to pass the Chagos Islands to Mauritius and jeopardize the long-term future of Diego Garcia beyond 100 years.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. I think number 2 has to be Ukraine, Russia. He has said that he's going to end this in 24 hours from the time that he's in office. Obviously, that doesn't seem realistic. However, I'm sure just like they have done with this Gaza deal, that there are a number of things that you and I aren't privy to that are going on in the background to try to get some kind of negotiation going on here. And that's what he ran on. So he's going to have to stick to it, or he's going to be highly criticized within months if he doesn't start working on these deals.
He knows that, and again, the clock is ticking on the midterms. The clock is ticking on when he becomes a lame duck, which will happen, as you say, year 3 and 4.
Yes, exactly right.
In terms of our country, we're talking a lot about whether he'll impose tariffs on the UK or European Union. Where you place on tariffs, I mean, there's an opportunity there, isn't there? The UK outside the EU to negotiate a bespoke deal with the US pretty quickly, maybe.
Yeah, he's talked about these tariffs, and again, this is something that he ran on, and he's told the American people that he's going to do this. How this impacts the UK, I mean, so obviously we've had a special relationship with the United Kingdom for a very long time. This one is certainly unique. I mean, if you look at your prime minister and you look at Donald Trump, these two people couldn't be any different. I mean, really, they disagree on climate change. They disagree on economic policy. They disagree on Ukraine. There are a lot of things that they just don't have in common. And so we'll see exactly how the special relationship works out. I suspect it's going to have to be done by people who are in and around them associated, frankly, people like Farage and others that can help negotiate these deals, because I just can't see these people. I mean, Trump and your prime minister don't seem like two gentlemen that are going to want to sit down and have a cup of tea. I don't know what they're going to talk. I don't know what they're going to talk about.
The special relationship runs deep, though, Gerry, doesn't it? I mean, runs deeper than people. It goes back decades and decades. I mean, it's basically about sharing intelligence, really. That's the deal. That's how we work together as two nations. So
Absolutely true.
You're going to see two individuals put their differences behind them. We look in the past to Barack Obama getting on pretty well with David Cameron, again, Tory and Democrat, and reverse that, you've got George W. Bush and Tony Blair, Labour and Republicans. So normally these things are
do. No, it was a very, sort of a little awkward relationship there with Theresa May, but but I think those are personalities. But I do agree with you, Chris, that the relationship between the two countries goes far deeper than the leadership of these countries.
You mentioned Farage there, just very briefly,
Yeah.
Gerry. Do you think he will be the kind of Trump whisperer? He'll be the person who can help oil the wheels, if only he's trusted by the UK here to do so?
Well, he really should be trusted by the UK, and it's really beyond me that people can't look through politics and understand that the President Trump is a person who values loyalty. He values his relationship. You mentioned earlier that some of the picks that he has for nominees are unusual. They are unusual, but you know what? These are people that have been around him for a long time and that he trusts. And whether or not people in the UK leadership want to embrace this, they really should use Nigel as much as they possibly can to help foster that relationship with Trump.
And just finally, do you think we're going to see a trade deal with the US maybe in a couple of years' time? Would you put a timescale on that?
I think so. I mean, we've been talking about this for some time now, but I think we've got the right people here, at least in the U.S., to try to move this thing forward. And, Ambassador Stevens, he's a good Arkansas. My wife is from Arkansas, so I have to give a little credit to him coming into office as the ambassador. Again, he's got the right people in place to try to bring this forward.
Yeah. Well, Gerry Gunster, have a great time at the party with Nigel Farage. Send me some pictures and we'll talking to you again soon.
We will. We're going to miss you, Chris.
Well, I was there in 2017. I can't be here. I'm presenting on GB News on Monday and the rest, so I'll be busy here. But I'll be thinking about you guys having a great time with that.
Send your photos. All right, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Gerry Gunster, thank you for joining us ahead of a busy weekend for you on Chopper's Political Podcast. And thank you earlier to David Greenwood for his time. And thank you to all for listening again to our podcast. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Email me chopper@gbnews.uk. Please tell your friends about this podcast and leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That helps other people to find it. Thanks to the great team of colleagues at GB News behind this podcast, Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. And again, thank you again for listening or watching wherever you are. If you want more Chopper in your life, please do catch me during the week on GB News, popping up with analysis on UK politics and next week also on US politics. And keep up to date with our best political reporting on our website, gbnews.com. But for me, cheerio.